I see the MK party as a faction of the ANC, right? It's a dissatisfied faction of the ANC that detests, hates Ramaphosa. So Ramaphosa now is really he's in charge of the ANC and his people. So now, if they choose to govern with people like the MK party and the EFF, they must know that their leadership or Ramaphosa's presidency is at risk. Those guys are going to turn around against Ramaphosa, and that won't be good for Ramaphosa. So his presidency is at risk because remember, at least it's been reported that part of the demands by the MK party is that Ramaphosa must go. And that is what Zuma seeks. And that is why he did what he's doing, to split the ANC, because he wants to
Speaking about our former president, Jacob Zuma, what do you make of the rise of his party, the phenomenal rise of his party, MK?
Well, look, I see the rise of the MK party. I see the MK party as a faction of the ANC, right? It's a dissatisfied faction of the ANC that detests, hates Ramaphosa. It didn't like him. It lost in the 2017 Nazareth conference. It's never recovered from that. It's a faction that is it's a Zuma faction that has never really liked Ramaphosa since the Nazareth conference in December 2017. And since then, they've never really accepted Ramaphosa. They've undermined him, did everything to undermine Ramaphosa's presidency, to portray him as someone who is, of course, there's much to criticize with our president, Ramaphosa, on public policy, on his style of governance. We could go on. It's a democracy. We should do that. But within the ANC itself, the Zuma faction has never wanted Ramaphosa to really govern the ANC and the country itself for many reasons. I should say. So what happened was that you had a Ramaphosa faction, right, and you had the Zuma faction, and they couldn't get along since the Nazareth conference in 2017. Over the years, they just couldn't get along. Jacob Zuma saw the Ramaphosa as a faction or a group of people who are after him, and who mistreat him. He doesn't get fair treatment, and up it went and went and went and went up until to a point where Zuma said, I guess as a chess player himself, he said, I'm going to strategize it. I need to hurt these people in the 2024 election. Because remember, Zuma is still very much popular, especially in KwaZulu-Natal, my province. Very much popular, huge support there. In fact, by the way, the reason why the ANC went to them, became an ANC governed province, was mainly because of Jacob Zuma. Right. It was governed by the IFP before, the Inkatha Freedom Party. But then over the years, as this senior Zulu sort of prominent, charismatic personality came through, Mr. Zuma, because KwaZulu-Natal swapped into Zuma. So he has always had huge support there, Mr. Zuma. And now he said, you know what, I am going to use this huge support I have, the very big support I have, to fight back against the ANC, right? And I'm going to hurt them at the election in 2024. And that is what exactly happened. He said, you know what, as a faction, I'm moving away. I'm start. What? Remember, really, he has never resigned from the ANC. So he still says he remains a member and still is. But he said, I'm going to lead this MK party to show them that I have a huge impact on them. And that I do believe that the idea with Zuma is to look for a negotiation process, or somehow weaken the ANC to a level where they can get into a negotiation, and somehow he wants to shape them, he wants to have an influence in how things go in governance. So that, of course, he can get some you can say some benefits from a legal perspective. As we know, he's dealing with many sort of court cases he has to deal with. And his arms deal corruption trial will begin in April next year. So he's a man who's really desperate to shape things up, and he wants somehow to influence the ANC and to get it into a footing or a direction that will favor him, and hopefully, at least to him, according to him, to a point where he can get to be, to his 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 court issues to be dropped in some form. How you do that, I'm not sure. Perhaps maybe could have a president pardoning him, or things like that if he found guilty, or you could have maybe influenced the prosecution's team, things like that within the structure of our governance. And Zuma wants to reshape that so that things go according to his to his view, and according to his favor. Now, as I'm saying that, that is what explains the the what is MK Party. It's a faction of the ANC. It was very much huge, um, and also as well. What also played into that, of course, was the frustrations around our governance in the country, the economy that is not growing, high unemployment rates, the problems of blackouts over the years, so the problems of crime. So all those things as well, people will say, well, that also played a factor in terms of saying people are looking for an alternative. Fine, we can add that. That is okay. But I do believe that there is that, this is the Zuma faction, basically. The Zuma faction of the ANC, it's decided to say, you know what, we are going to step away. Now, there are also some comments by some people that, in fact, I saw one of the academics, South African academics, saying that there is also ethnicity with Zuma. He is a Zulu guy, and it's all about, the Zulu way of doing things, and that people who have voted for him, the reason why it's mainly in KwaZulu-Natal is because he is Zulu. There is some ethnic sort of things taking place. Even Helen Zille as well of the DA, that's what she has said post the election, that we've moved into that ethnic kind of political sort of things that are taking place. So we shall see how that goes. So, but I mean, that's how you can explain the MK Party. And it's one of the things that are quite stunning to me is that it's a party that's got really, they didn't have a plan as to what's the structure, who does what are the roles within the party at a senior level, what is the kind of leadership they want. The whole structure is not really clearly defined. Yeah, they've ran into the election and really hurt the ANC, and we shall see how it goes. And I just suspect it's something that won't survive without Zuma. This is a Zuma thing. The moment Zuma disappears, the whole thing just implodes.
What about the future of President Cyril Ramaphosa? Do you think he will see out his second term?
It depends how the ANC handles this process, and by this process, I'm talking about the way of governing going forward. If it is going to align itself, this is the ANC's Ramaphosa now. You can say the ANC now, and I've argued that over the years, Ramaphosa is fully in control of the ANC now. Remember post Nasrec December 2017 conference, that the National Executive Committee was kind of split. So you had the Zuma faction and the Ramaphosa faction. You could call them that. But over the years, Ramaphosa has gained that he's all the guys who were the Ace Makashules, can go on within within the NEC. They've really, Zuma himself, he has even left, basically, to be with his MK party. So Ramaphosa now is really he's in charge of the ANC and his people. So now, if they choose to govern with people like the MK party and the EFF, they must know that their leadership or Ramaphosa's presidency is at risk. Those guys are going to turn around against Ramaphosa, and that won't be good for Ramaphosa. So his presidency is at risk because, remember, at least it's been reported that part of the demands by the MK party is that Ramaphosa must go. And that is what Zuma seeks, and that is why he did what he's doing, to split the ANC, because he wants to somehow push for a negotiation that sees Ramaphosa going, and someone who Zuma favors can take over. So if he aligns, or if the ANC aligns itself with parties like the MK and the EFF, Ramaphosa's presidency is at risk. He could really be off by end of his second term.
Yeah, brilliant, brilliant, brilliant speech. What do you guys think? Jacob Zuma, for many of us who, are slowly now beginning to understand Jacob Zuma's vision and what he's really trying to go after in South Africa. Most of his speeches now, and his comeback was really interesting because he started making a lot of speeches in his Zulu language, which many of us do not understand. But now, recently, we've been having a lot of his speeches in English, which is now really explaining his fight and showing the idea behind his fight and the fact that his comeback into politics is to challenge the ANC, not the ANC itself, but the ANC of President Ramaphosa, because he argues that Ramaphosa seems to be upholding values of white monopoly capital, white supremacy, and really corrupting the DNA of the original ANC that was led by the bulwarks of like the likes of Nelson Mandela, Walter Sisulu, Lituli, and the likes, who really set South Africa free from the trunks of apartheid. But in this video, anyway, I thought to analyze a really interesting report article on the Spectator on, explaining why Jacob Zuma remains a problem for South Africa. Really interesting. I thought we could just analyze briefly to really understand how most of the media see Jacob Zuma and what really is on ground at the moment. Hearing now this video from Jacob Zuma himself. So it argues that more than 30 years after the Berlin Wall came down, leaders of the African National Congress, ANC, South Africa's long-time ruling party, still refer to each other as comrade, unless that is you're seen as a problem. So Comrade Cyril Ramaphosa will be here. ANC Secretary General Fikile Imbalula told journalists on Sunday morning as he explained how around 5 p.m. the president would receive the final election results at the main counting center between Johannesburg and the capital Pretoria. So this is an account now of the May 29th South African elections that actually just took place, and they actually had a swearing in ceremony of the parliamentarians last Saturday. Really interesting to watch, with the likes of Julius Malema and opponents of proponents of the government of national unity really giving some really interesting speeches. I'll be posting some of them on this channel. So Fikile Mbalula, who is Secretary General of the ANC, speaks about how that there's nothing to celebrate in terms of performance of the ANC. We know that the ANC lost, I think, really staggering 20% from its 60% majority, which is it has enjoyed over the years. This year it polled, I think, 40%. It lost a lot, and it couldn't attain the 50 plus 1% majority, which it needed to now roll in, majority voice in South Africa. And so it now had to join in other smaller parties to form what has been termed a government of national unity in South Africa at the moment. So it says that it sounds weird referring to the billionaire Ramaphosa as comrade, as if he were some commissar from Cuba or the former Soviet Union, both of which had backed the ANC when it challenged the white minority rule in South Africa. The report goes on to say that before taking the presidency, President Ramaphosa ran the McDonald's burger chain in South Africa and held shares in some of the country's largest mining firms. A disciple of Lenin, though he is not. It says that for the ANC, there was indeed nothing to celebrate in the election that just passed on May 29, 2024. From 57% of the vote 5 years earlier, they had crashed to just over 40%, giving them perhaps 161 seats in a parliament of 400, well short of the 201 needed to govern the country. But Mbalula, a former police minister, stressed that his party had the single largest share of seats, which is true, although close on 3 out of 5 of those who cast a ballot had chosen someone else. Now, it speaks about how the Independent Electoral Commission in South Africa ran the poll as best as it could, short on staff and budget. There have been 539 objections lodged so far, and no surprise given that more than 40 parties had run either the national or provincial level or both, but most didn't win a seat, and some were sure to be aggrieved no matter how transparent the process was. So this is how election works, okay? There would always be winners and losers, and in this case, there were lots of losers in South Africa's election. Now, the report on the Spectator further goes on to say that much of the ANC's loss has been picked up by Mkhonto Wesizwe, that's the MK party that's led by Jacob Zuma. And it says that just 6 months old, the MK party led by former comrade Jacob Zuma, he actually said that the party now refers to him merely as Zuma and will occasionally deign to add Mr. you know. But anyway, he says that this is ironic because MK Party is much more Marxist in style, wanting to nationalize all land, all mines and banks without compensation, just like we know the EFF, and also largely scrap the constitution. This is the major stronghold of the MK Party led by Jacob Zuma. Jacob Zuma argues that the constitution of South Africa is a Roman Dutch constitution that needs to be scrapped so that South Africa can reflect more of an indigenous style constitution that upholds the ideals of indigeneity from the perspective of Zulu monarchy and Zulu nationalism. But anyway, the report also speaks about how, of course, dismiss the dozens of cases Zuma faces in court as a result of an inquiry he set up while president, which he said would clear rumors of corruption on his watch. Instead, day by day, it argues that Zuma is actually really guilty of many crimes. He says that many witnesses still come forward with testimonies ranging from the odd bribe to allegations of embezzlement against Jacob Zuma. Now, it says that in no time, the ANC itself appeared to be in the dock. The party removed Zuma as president, replacing him with former union boss turned entrepreneur Ramaphosa. It argues that Zuma has come away with 14% of the vote, especially in 2029 election, but he still claims it was rigged against him and he wants a revote. He is insisting that the IEC should not declare the process over, which happens under the constitution when this politically neutral body hands the results to the president. MK Party and their Zulu supporters made veiled threats of carnage in one of the world's most violent countries. That is not taken lightly, and in his speech, Fikile Mbalula made clear the police and army were ready to deal with troublemakers. Now, 3 years ago, when Zuma was briefly jailed for contempt of court, riots in KwaZulu-Natal left 354 people dead, and in an orgy of looting, shopping malls were burned to the ground, more than 5,000 people were arrested. Now, it argues that, it says here that on that Sunday evening, this Sunday evening, now dressed in a grey suit with a mulberry tie, President Ramaphosa, 71, turned up as promised and received the official figures in the presence of the Chief Justice. So this is Sunday after the elections on May 29. It says that he kept his speech as neutral as he could, joking with the audience that he hoped he might be welcomed as a distinguished guest rather than an extinguished one. He also then stressed that he was there not as a politician, but as a president of the republic. Now, in his words, he argued that millions of South Africans have cast their votes in cities and towns, in villages and on farms, at voting stations, at home and abroad. He said that the people have taken responsibility for the future of their country, and the democracy remains strong, robust, and enduring. And really, I can attest that the democracy in South Africa really feels really strong. If you watched, the swearing in of the parliamentarians convened by Chief Justice Zondo, on last Saturday, where many of the parliamentarians in South Africa were sworn in and the parliament had its first sitting, you would really respect the democracy in South Africa. I think it was really something to really, don my heart for. But anyway, the report continues saying that without mentioning Zuma, Ramaphosa said that politicians had no option but to accept that whether they like it or not, the people have spoken. And clearly, a rerun of the election is not on the cards. Ramaphosa continues to say that we respect the wishes of the people. And then, in the spirit of the first black president, Nelson Mandela, who took over power 30 years ago, he reached out to this very mixed nation. He argued, Ramaphosa speaking now to the nation, says, we must build a country which everyone, black and white, men and women, young and old, can call home. And this remains the defining mission, according to Ramaphosa. And this is why Zuma is really angry with Ramaphosa, because according to Zuma, this wasn't the original objective of the ANC, and that the ANC's DNA genetic code is being polluted by Ramaphosa. Ramaphosa also argues that South Africa must be inclusive and united. Okay, and now Ramaphosa also said that the parties had argued often forcibly, adding that people also had a right to expect their leaders to overcome differences and work together to find common ground. And I want to underline that for the good of everyone. All this, he said, must be done peacefully within the constitution and the rule of law, and the seats the politicians occupied in the parliament belong not to us but the people of South Africa. Then, in all 11 languages, including Zulu, English, Afrikaans, and his native Venda, one of the country's smallest ethnic groups of no more than 900,000 people, based along the Limpopo River, Ramaphosa again thanked the nation. Yes, so the article further goes on to say that It also goes on to say that Ramaphosa now faces the challenge of finding political partners who will respect that the ANC has the largest number of seats while adding their own flavor to a coalition. Julius Malema and his economic freedom fighters, who saw their support drop below 10% and who, like Jacob Zuma, wants wholesale nationalization, have insisted that they take the financial portfolio. In a blend, that what he means by the financial portfolio is that Julius Malema is arguing that his vice president, Floyd Shivambu, should be the finance minister in any coalition whatsoever. Now, the report goes on to say that in a blend of the US and British systems, a government here can appoint ministers from amongst its MPs, but also from outside, and it is rumored that the economic ministries will go to experts from business and academia. So, in other words, the government of national unity that is being formed by President Ramaphosa at the moment might be formed as a technocracy, where technocrats will be handling, business. They'll be handling, economic ministries. Okay. So it also argues that Mr. Zuma has been barred by the courts from standing as an MP because of his past prison term, and he still faces a multitude of charges in court. But then it's asking, why did people vote for him? The answer is like the nation as a whole did not. In 7 of the 9 provinces in South Africa, MK wasn't even at the top 3. But in Zuma's home region of KwaZulu Natal, his tally was 46%. South Africa has no racial majority, but 1 in 4 are Zulu. The only other province where he made a showing was at Mpumalanga, where in the north, the famous Kruger National Park stretches for more than 8,000 square miles, and the south of Mpumalanga borders KwaZulu-Natal, and many people speak Zulu. So these are the regions where Jacob Zuma has a majority of supporters, at Mpumalanga and also in KwaZulu-Natal. But it argues that it was more than just an ethnic vote that spared the ANC. Millions of young people are unemployed, and crime has given South Africa a murder rate higher than Haiti. After the ANC, the Democratic Alliance, led by John Steenhuisen, also from KwaZulu-Natal, took second place at 21%. Like Ramaphosa, the party, that's the DA now, Democratic Alliance, is pro-business and has campaigned against corruption, which it says has dropped since Zuma left office, but it still remains a problem. Each year, it argues here that Transparency International releases an index on how corrupt a country is perceived around the world. Denmark is the top of the clean list, while Somalia sits at a number of 180 at the bottom, with Britain in its 20th place and scoring the same as France. But South Africa in that list is at number 83 in a bracket with Vietnam and Kosovo. So anyway, it finalizes the argument saying that on Tuesday, Ramaphosa must give an official address to his party, but there's no indication whether by then he may have a coalition, let alone a cabinet. We now know that he has a cabinet and that it was joined by the Patriotic Alliance, the Inkatha Freedom Party, the Democratic Alliance, and then the ANC. And now they've called it the Government of National Unity in South Africa. So it says that there he and his fellow comrades must decide a way forward, and above all, what to do with Mr. Zuma. So, in other words, we see that, the ANC really understands and perceives Zuma as a problem, and that Zuma is really relentless in his fight. Zuma is really relentless in this fight against the government of national unity. He calls the government of national unity meaningless. It doesn't make sense according to him. It's totally different from the government of national unity that was formed when he was around under the leadership of President Mandela in 1994, and that is really fighting to, strengthen a progressive caucus that could take on the government of national unity led by President Ramaphosa in South Africa as an opposition in the parliament. So this is the nature of things South Africa is facing, and the character of Jacob Zuma's fight as a black liberation fighter, and why he still bounced back even at the age of 82 in South Africa's politics, and why he's fighting to reinstall and reinstate the ANC that was really set up and that led South Africa free from apartheid under the leadership of bulwarks like Walter Sisulu, Nelson Mandela, Oliver Tambo, and others. But anyway, this is how far we'll go on this video. What do you guys think about this speech by Jacob Zuma? Share your thoughts in the comments.